everyone, no matter your industry or role within a company, everyone has a vested interest in wanting to make work more meaningful for themselves and for their teams or organization. And so that's really representative in the people that come to the conference.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Welcome to today's episode, where we have two incredible guests with us, Zach Blumenfeld and Nick Lombardino, co-founders of CultureCon. CultureCon is a certified B Corporation on a mission to inspire positive change around organizational culture. They believe that every individual, no matter their role, has the power to make work more meaningful for themselves and their organization. Through immersive conferences, online courses, consulting services, and certification programs, CultureCon is all about helping people become cultural change agents. Their vision is clear: to connect people and inspire action that shapes healthier, more uplifting, and productive workplaces. In today's conversation, Zach and Nick will share how they bring their core values of human connection, diverse perspectives, and practical action to life. Whether you're a business owner, an HR leader, a C-suite executive, or just someone passionate about fostering meaningful workplace change, you'll gain practical tools and insights to take your culture to the next level. All right, Nick, Zach, Nick, just excited to have you guys on this. Well, I don't know when it's going to be released, but today's a Monday, and it's a great way. It's a Monday morning for me on the West, and just really excited to chat with you guys and talk about vibes. And hopefully, each person will take something away that they can do and implement and just have bigger impact on people. And I know that's what you guys are ultimately doing, is having an impact on people. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being excited. Thanks for bringing the energy.
Thanks for having us. We're thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Well, as I do, let's start out. I'd like each of you to tell me how you define a vibe.
What I was thinking about, like, the definition of a vibe, and I think there's a lot of overlap with culture, and there's so many definitions for the word culture. It's kind of this fluffy, nebulous word. But when I think vibe, it's like culture, but raise the energy. Like, let's just bring the energy and bring the roof down. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. It's like the culture, but a very energetic culture.
I like that too, because it's like, yeah, if you want to distill organizational culture into maybe like a pithy sentence, like I think what Zach and I have kind of latched on to is it's the organization's way of saying, like, this is how we do things around here, right? It's that set of shared beliefs and actions. But I like the sprinkling of vibe on top of that, because when I hear it, it just makes me it just feels much more personal to me. I think that's why I love this vibe nomenclature. So yeah, I like Zach said, for me it's like it's the energies that I'm feeling when I'm at work, whether it's like restorative energy, creative energy, or even at times there could be energies that are depleting as well. So yeah, I really like the vibe because it feels more personal to me.
I like that you said personalized, because that is like my shtick. If I had one thing about what I have done in my career, whether it be as an entrepreneur or in a corporate setting, or even with stuff I do with my kids and their sports, it's like personalizing the experience and making it feel important to that person sitting in front of me, not just like this peanut butter spread. And that's what I'm doing in like the HR consulting space, right? Is even for a small business, making them feel like they have the personalization of HR within the scope of what they're doing. That is for me. And I love that you said it.
That's real. Yeah, because it's like it's kind of a two-way street, right? It's like the personalization that the organization can try and cultivate for their employees, but then at the same time, the personal accountability that the individual has to themselves to try and carve out personalization. Yeah, I really love that.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way, so thank you for that. Also, Nick, I wanna say, and this is, like, top of mind for me because I was listening to a podcast over the weekend about from a body language expert, which I don't know if you guys are on TikTok, but I guess she's all over TikTok, and there's something to be said about, like, warmth, and when you show your palm when you're approaching somebody and you, like, waved at the camera when you came on, so great job.
I do that same thing right before I punch somebody in the head, so I might skew the data a little bit.
You want them to feel really comfortable before you punch them in the face.
That's right, blindside 'em.
Well, I wanna hear from you guys. This is not about me. I wanna hear your story into, like, where you are today, but, like, what got you where you are today in terms of, like, defining moments of, like, why vibes are important. I mean, you are the CultureCon guys. Like, this is what you do. This is the space that you live and breathe in, but there's a story to how you got to that and why. So, if you can just share with us, like, start wherever you wanna start. This is your platform to share. That's what I think is so important for people to hear and understand.
I was actually just talking to a friend about this last week. There was like this specific moment during the pandemic where I just felt my vibe energy so radically depleted that it just kind of took me out of work completely and had like this profound moment of me asking myself like, dude, what's going on right now? So yeah, I'll unpack that a little bit. I think for many of us, I think we have these work experiences that when they're going well, it's maybe really easy to not fully understand or appreciate all the things that fold into that positive work vibe. And it takes a moment or moments where you're on the other side of it and you're just feeling totally drained to really understand, not only to have perspective and appreciation, but then to have an opportunity to unpack what's going on right now that's making me feel the way that I'm feeling. And so after this moment that I alluded to earlier, it was a conduit for me to go out and start getting some what I'll just call self-help. And it went so far as to me having a life coach and me reading a lot of books to better understand my intrinsic motivators and what my strengths are, and then try and think through what are the types of work environments that are going to allow me to bring my best self forward. Really, what I came to understand at the end of the day was I had a lot of personal accountability in trying to do whatever I can to create those types of work environments for myself. So, some of the things that I learned about Nick is I like connecting with people virtually, but only up until a point. So, if I'm in a whole day of meetings and I'm with people virtually, I find that I'm a far less empathetic listener. I find that I'm more easily distracted. And those aren't qualities that I want to have when I'm being present with team members or external stakeholders. And so there are elements of me like intentionally trying to design my own workday where I can still have the convenience and the productivity of engaging with people virtually, but then making sure I'm finding opportunities to connect with people in person as well. And that doesn't necessarily have to be my coworkers. I mean, I do love seeing Zach as often as I can in person.
What's not to love about
Well, it's
Zach?
not to love, but it doesn't have to be your teammates, right? I'm somebody who's a little bit more extroverted, and so I try and spend a decent amount of my day being with people in person around me, right? And that just gives me so much more restorative energy throughout the day. Yeah, and just like understanding elements about myself where like I appreciate having creative autonomy and being able to have these types of opportunities to experiment with new ideas. And all of this stuff was, some of it was kind of known to me, some of it wasn't known to me at all up until this point. And then it just kind of had this day where it was like meeting after meeting after meeting, and it was doing like rudimentary task after task after task, and I was just feeling so beat down for a variety of different reasons. So that was kind of like the that moment where I decided, okay, time to unpack what's going on here in Nick world and see where we can go.
Did you ever get feedback before you came to this hyper sense of self-awareness? where it was like, Nick, like, your attitude sucks, or you know what I mean? Or were you able to, like, know your attitude was, or how you were feeling was a certain way, but you were able to kind of mask that in front of somebody?
Yes, I did the super healthy thing, and I just buried those feelings deep, deep down inside of me while they were no, but, like, half joking, half serious. It was like when I had these moments of feeling like, let's just say, for simplicity, there wasn't the right fit. Like, there was just kind of these thoughts and feelings swirling around. I had so much of my personal identity tied into this company that I previously worked with that it was easier for me to be just like, dude, don't go down that rabbit hole, right? Like, these are all the things that you love about working for this organization. Let's just stay, tunnel vision on that, and we'll just push that stuff aside. And obviously, how those things tend to work out in the long run.
Sure. Yeah. Zach, what about you? Tell us your journey to getting here.
Yeah, I think back to my first job out of college, and I was super fortunate. I got a job in an industry I had no experience in, and a role I had some experience in, kind of sales account management. But was kind of the kicker for me in the interview process is the CEO is part of all the interviews, and he ended up being a mentor of mine, and I could kind of get that vibe that I wanted, like, right off the bat, and I didn't really know this was, like, a vibe at the time or, like, I was starting to really feel what it's like to work in a culture where you're accepted, and that kinda resonates with my values, and I could align with the mission. For 2 years, it was just, like, this awesome experience, and then he left the company. I ended up leaving shortly after, but we had this new CEO who hopped in, and it was just, like, completely opposite leadership styles, the company tanked, the culture tanked, and so I could kind of, at a very young age, get an experience of, like, what it's like to work in a really good culture, what it's like to work in a poor culture that I don't align with, and I could kinda use that as I was going forward in my career and starting to look at other jobs, starting other companies and things like that.
What do you think it was? I mean, you can reserve the names and identities of people who don't wanna be blasted, right? But what do you think it was looking back that just, like, went from good to bad? It sounds like pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to identify it pretty quickly because it was things that I could tell really resonate with me personally, maybe not for everyone, but I mean, this was over a decade ago, so it was things like being able to work remotely at that time, kind of trust and autonomy, things like that, because the first CEO was like, I'd come to him with a problem and he'd like help me work it out, but it was really my thing that I was working on, and he would provide guidance. There was a lot of travel. I'd have to travel kind of all across North America to meet with different clients, and he was just very hands off. But when I needed him, he was there. The other CEO that was like everyone's in the office, kind of this mandate. This was like way before the pandemic time. It was a mandate to come back to
He
the
was a
office.
pioneer for
Um,
mandates coming back.
yeah, he's a pioneer and return to work strategies, what not to do. Yeah, he would come to a lot of meetings with me, so it was almost like Big Brother, different reporting techniques, so you'd have to, like, really narrow in on what you're doing every hour of every day.
Sounds pretty awful.
Yeah, it wasn't a good experience, left shortly after that.
It kind of reaffirms too. I don't know if this data is still holds up, but I remember in the past, I think Gallup had a poll that showed that the number one contributing factor to an employee staying where they work is their relationship with their manager.
Yes, I think that will always be.
Yep.
Always be.
Yeah, because it's your connection point to the culture, really. And I think more important even now because people are remote, right? So, like, if you're not talking to people in the hallway, who are you talking to probably the most? Probably the coworker that you're either became friends with when you worked in the office, or that maybe was a referral from you, or you just connected with really quick, and your boss. Right? So those are your connection points. But you bring up a good point, Zach and Nick, to say this guy was a pioneer of return to work. It's an interesting conversation I've been having a lot lately about this mandate of return to work because it is a hot topic and I think has gotten hotter lately. So I actually don't think, because Nick, you mentioned it, you like to connect with people. And I think even the introverts out there like to connect with people too. It's just certain people, right? So an extrovert might like to connect with a lot of people because it's just like talking to people gives them energy and they need it. Where the introvert is a little bit more selective on who can take their energy, but they still like to connect. We're all human. I actually think the return to work thing is that people no longer feel like they have the autonomy to make the decision. Right? It's like their autonomy is being stripped because at home, they can kinda do as they need to do as long as the work's getting done, so that's where the, like, I'm more productive at home, and some are, some aren't, I don't know, I don't have a preference either way, I like being able to have it both ways, but I really think that's what it comes down to is, like, "You no longer trust me, huh?" And it's not that at all.
Right. That's what it feels like. Yeah.
That's what it feels like, and that's what people are assigning to it. It's like, "You don't trust me anymore. I don't get to make my own decisions. I don't have the autonomy to do as I have been doing for the last 5 years. Like, how dare you?" Right? Anyways, that's what, it's just like this theme that I feel like keeps coming up and coming up and coming up because connection is so important for everybody.
So important. It's kind of wild to think about how many years ago, 4 years ago, when the lockdown was hot and heavy, and there was, to a large degree, a lot of validation around how productive people can be working from home. And for me personally, I think I maybe naively thought that we probably would have, we being, business at large, maybe would have figured out what that right operating model is by now. But then, like, when I stop to think about it, it's like, no, it makes perfect sense that this is still very much something that people need to still think through, because there are a lot of different accountabilities at play when trying to figure out what these working models are best for, right? On the organizational side, we believe that it's the business's responsibility to the best of their ability understand how they produce their best work, right? And then when they know that, creating the right channels, processes, systems to try and help their employees understand how that can come to life. And that's not to say that that doesn't change in the life cycle of a business, right? They have to map to the workforce and other macroeconomic factors as well. But then on the other side of things, and this is what we were just talking about earlier, like, individuals also have an accountability and understanding how they produce their best work and the types of environments that they want to be a part of, so they can maybe have more creative autonomy, maybe have opportunities to meet with people in person from time to time, right? And so, long-winded way of saying, this is not a one size fits all type of thing. And so it makes a ton of sense why still, 4 or 5 years later, we're still kind of like, what do we do? What works best?
Well, I think everyone's looking for a silver bullet too, right? And to go back to the personalization point, like culture is different, always has been different for every single company out there. I can name 2 that are alike. They could say, "Oh, we do similar things," or "We have similar values," but the dynamic of the people really help bring that to life. And so I think when people are saying, out there saying like hybrid's best, all in person is best, all remote is best, and then we meet on every quarter. It's like, well, I don't know, maybe for your company. Right? And so there's like this feud of like what the right thing is because all we've known for the most part, what was the majority and popular was going into an office, right? Until COVID. And then it was the whole dynamic of what people knew to be true was kind of blasted apart. But it really goes back to like personally for your organization, what does it look like? What does it mean? And why? Why do we go to the office? Why do we work from home? Why do we have hybrid schedule? What's the intention behind it? And then organizations communicating that intention, which I think is where they've just like gravely failed. It's communicating that message and communicating it clearly. So okay, so you guys both had these personal experiences, right? That like kind of brought to life like, "Oh my gosh, this is really important and makes me personally feel one way or another, good or bad." And so talk to me about kind of like how you I'm sure there's a lot of life in between, but then you have transitioned it to what you guys are doing together. So help me understand how that all came to be, the story around that and kind of the magic that is now.
Yeah, kinda going back to my personal story about the really awesome CEO, really bad CEO. At the same time, I was actually having conversations, this is gonna sound really random, but I was having conversations with my eye doctor, and this was over the course of, like, a couple years, happening kind of like just once a year when I'd go in to get my contact prescription redone. And during his time as an eye doctor, he was actually scaling up a technology company in the back of his practice that was kind of like electronic healthcare records for eye care practices. So kind of like Epic, if you're familiar with that company, but for the eye care practice industry. With his story, it was really unique because he was growing from the back of his practice to over 300 employees, and they were all virtual. So he was sharing these kind of unique culture challenges they were having, and that on top of his business, he wanted to create a software to kind of help with the culture. They had a very strong culture, but they'd only see each other once a year at the annual meeting. So trying to keep them connected in between those times. So after like year 2 of getting my contacts refitted and talking about this culture conversation, I was having kind of these personal experiences, really good, really bad culture. And I was just like, yeah, let's grab coffee, let's talk about it more. And so we started building this software called Third Space, which helped with workplace culture, mainly personal and professional development, employee engagement. And before we had software, we'd have these round tables. So imagine a culture con, but way, way smaller, just an hour and a half, kind of pressure testing different culture ideas we had and trying to get feedback to make sure we were building a software to help solve those challenges. They would always run over like some went a couple hours over the 90-minute kind of time allotment that we had. And I could just see people getting super passionate about this when they started opening up and talking about their culture challenges. So I pitched my co-founders of the software company like, hey, this is awesome what we're building, but it's such a humanistic challenge we're trying to solve. We should have some human elements to it, kind of like these roundtables. They wanted to stick with culture, but they're like, yeah, go try building this on the side if you want. And so they actually ended up connecting me to Nick, and I pitched him on the idea. First person I talked to about it, and he was just like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we tried it out, and here we are, 7, 8 years later, still doing the thing.
What I always anchor to in the earliest conversations with Zach talking to me about these roundtables was just like the willingness and desire for these people in the room to want to help one another. And so like Zach said, one person would come forward with some sort of workplace culture challenge, and it was almost like the people in the room crowdsourcing solutions for these individuals, and even going so far as to be like, hey, I have tools, I have connections, I have a desire to want to help you solve this. Let's keep this conversation going afterwards. And so when Zach was telling me about these sessions, I mean, it wasn't that difficult to extrapolate it just a little bit further and be like, what would happen if we just tried to create a more formal container where these types of conversations could take place?
And Zach, were these conversations happening in person? Were these virtual? Like what was the main mode?
Yeah, mostly in person. We would kind of invite people in around the breakfast hour for like a 60, 90-minute session. And yeah, they'd be funny because they'd all start the same way. Like no one would want to be the first one to talk. It was like a middle school like group project. And then we'd ask a leading question like back then it was like, "Tell us about your millennials," or something, and one CEO would open up, and then another, and it was like therapy session, just sharing the good and the bad. And like Nick said, people were just like, "Oh, I had that similar challenge. Here's how I solved it. Maybe that would help," or "Let me connect you to this person." And there was just such a sense of community around it. So I always thought that, what if we took this to like a bigger container, a bigger half-day session and see where we can go with it? So we really lucked out because the people that come to our events and that are in our community are just like the nicest people. They're at our event because they want to make work better for folks. So we were really lucked out with the community and the members that we have.
So fast forward, there was a transition, right? To these little community groups to meeting Nick and then
Yeah. So Nick and I don't have any event planning experience. We still don't really know what we're doing, but we kind of figure it out on the way. We decided to kind of in typical startup fashion launch an MVP version of what we anticipated would be a bigger culture con. So we set up we called it mini culture con, and our goal was to get 50 people in the room. I think we planned it on Valentine's Day. There was a blizzard in Wisconsin. Like everything went wrong that could go wrong. But we actually had to expand the room size because we had over 100 people show up at the event. I knew we
wow.
were onto something, and we're like, all right, let's try this even bigger in June. And that's when we had our first CultureCon was June of 2018.
One of the things that Zach and I, in the vibe of just thinking through what it feels like to be a part of our conference today. If you couldn't tell, Zach and I feel most comfortable when we feel like we have permission to be silly. So there was a period of time where I think Zach and I had maybe undue anxiety about the conference because we were feeling aspects of like imposter syndrome. It was like we didn't want to show up to our events and feel like we were over our skis or like trying to convey an image where Zach and I are experts in certain areas of workplace culture. So it was like a few years where we were trying to figure out like how do we do this in a way that's like authentic to us, where then a lot of these elements of conference planning becomes a lot more like joyful and easy for us. And it was just a few years ago where we were like, well, first of all, Zach and Nick feel like we're more connectors than we are experts ourselves. So that was kind of like how we chose to build our business model. And then on top of that, we were like, the culture of CultureCon needs to be something that Nick and Zach feel naturally aligned with. And so it's a long-winded way of saying our conference is very silly and fun and open. And it's just like Zach mentioned, the types of individuals that come to our conference that are kind of rallying behind this idea of like how do we make work better not only for ourselves but for those around us are people who are just genuinely curious and kind and open, and fortunately a lot of them are pretty silly like we are. So it's just like it's so fun, and we just we're so grateful that this is what we've lucked into, is this type of environment.
So, why do you think you are feeling that imposter syndrome? Because I think that is something that I myself find myself thinking about often, right? Or somebody will compliment you on something. I'm sure this still happens to you guys, and you're like, no, 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 no. I'm really not the expert. And you're like, maybe you are. Like, why does it matter? Why are you like, just allow it to be? But why did you find yourself in that mode of imposter syndrome?
It's a good question. I think for me, like I had this vision of CultureCon and what it could be someday, and we hit that pretty fast. Like I remember there was a time during our first conference, our big conference, and Nick and I were in the back of the room, and we had a panel. It was called Culture the Madison Way because we're based in Madison, Wisconsin. We had 5 or 6 executives from big corporations in Madison, kind of talking about why they've moved their company to Madison or continue to grow their culture and their company in Madison. And just like, I remember like elbowing Nick and I'm like, dude, look at how many people are here. And I just like didn't anticipate that it would actually work for some reason, but that room was packed to the brim and it just kind of exceeded my early expectations really, really early in our stage and our journey of CultureCon.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple years where, thank God for Zach, because I refused to even get up on stage and speak at all, because I didn't want somebody to look under the hood and realize that Nick was just full of shit and didn't know what he was talking about.
And here you are.
And
You're
here I
still
am.
talking.
But no, I mean, like, to your point, there is an element, I know this to be true, where there are aspects where Nick and Zach probably are qualified to talk thoughtfully about certain aspects of workplace culture. I think maybe where I'm speaking for me personally, I can't speak for Zach, times where I felt like the imposter syndrome really flare up were maybe topics that I truly didn't know enough about. And I felt like it would be bad for me to try and feign some element of expertise, knowing that these are big, some of these are really big and complex and let's just say complicated issues. And so there was always that nagging fear in the back of my mind that was just like, don't, they're going to find out, dude. Don't come out there and say something that you're not an expert on. But that was always, this is more of a, just like a Nick thing. I always felt like for me to feel comfortable speaking in public, it was always, for me to feel confident was really important. And for me to feel confident meant that I had to really know what I was talking about. So I think a lot of that kind of just bled into the early days of getting the thing going. Yeah.
I like what you said though about you guys have come to the realization that you're connectors, right? So you don't have to be the experts in culture, but you're the experts in connecting the right people around culture to create the community to be able to have those discussions and for people to learn new things about culture and vibes in the workplace, right? So You don't have to be all things to all people, but there's a piece of that connecting people that others don't have, right? But they have that deep expertise to be able to share as long as they're connected. That's a really big epiphany, I'm sure. When you had that, you're like, "Oh."
And I think that's where Nick and I find the most joy in this, at least for me personally. It's like being able to connect people, like minded individuals, and then go watch them do other things that are like way cooler than CultureCon. Like we've had people start their own culture conferences from our conference series or a culture community. And it's just really cool to see that stuff take place.
Yeah. Okay, so talk to me a little bit because you guys have since expanded CultureCon from Madison to the West. So that's awesome. And I think you guys talked a little bit about like the first time you were in the West and what that was like and what you learned from it and where you're going with it. What could people expect at CultureCon? Like if I sign up, I'm going to go like what is it?
It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, is how I like it.
Give me your elevator pitch.
No, that's it's just a joke because I've a friend of mine who he's never been to CultureCon. His name's Tim, and for some reason, my other friends like ask him about what CultureCon is, and that's how he tells people. So I just like to copy him, even though he's never been.
So good. I hope Tim listens to this and gets a good laugh.
I'm gonna send it to him now. That's great.
Perfect.
No, so CultureCon 2025, which is our annual conference in Madison, and CultureCon West are very similar events. They just take place in different cities, and but besides that, the flow of the conference, the type of people that come, pretty much the same. I would say, like from our survey data, the two aspects of our conference that people really gravitate to. First off, we're super fortunate to have amazing thought leaders and speakers and facilitators. So if you have workplace culture challenges or you have an awesome culture that you want to continue to grow and build, like this is the place to come and get insights and actionable takeaways that you can bring back to your organization and, hop in on Monday and try to start to make those changes. I would say going back to what we were talking about earlier, our favorite aspect of the conference, and I think actually our attendees too, is the people and the connections that you can make. It's just people who are like minded and they really care about other people. They want help with their cultures, but they're also willing to give insights that they've learned along the way. So these conversations that are happening during breaks in the hallways or at the after party or different networking events, those are probably some of the most powerful aspects of the conference.
It's super interesting too because kind of this anchoring belief is that everyone, no matter your industry or role within a company, everyone has a vested interest in wanting to make work more meaningful for themselves and for their teams or organization. And so that's really representative in the people that come to the conference in that it's super hodgepodgey. It's like so diverse. We got business owners and C-suite executives, directors, frontline managers, all the way down to individual contributors. So then how we have to program, knowing that this is such a broad spectrum of individuals, is that whomever the speaker is, they're going to have to be presenting content and information that anybody can latch onto, A, and then B, can be implemented relatively quickly within their place of work. So it's all about practical application as it relates to the content. And then with what Zach's talking about also is there's this element of just like shared connection at the conference that then bleeds outside of our walls. And now you have people who are continuing to collaborate and build awesome stuff together. Whether they're working in the same organization or not, they start building outside of the container of the conference. And those are the things that Zach and I are like, oh my gosh, this is like the coolest thing to see.
Do people just tell you about those? Like, how do you know those things continue outside of the conference?
We're trying to get better at knowing how to like have a better line of sight into what's happening. A lot of it we can see either by virtue of LinkedIn and social media collaborations in the future, or people coming back to us out of their own generosity and being like, "Hey, I just want to let you know me and so just built this thing, and it's all because we met at the conference. So just want to say right." And so it's like a lot of warm fuzzies there, but we are trying to figure out like how do we better quantify and celebrate these types of awesome collaborations that happen afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that could really be something that you share to get people to come, right? Is like you wanna connect you're feeling lonely and isolated at home, come to our conference. No, I'm
Right,
kidding.
right.
The commercial that you have. But seriously, like, people are looking for that type of community always, right? Like-minded people. Yeah, I was sharing that I was at this volleyball tournament over the weekend, and when you're around a lot of different people for a long period of time, I mean, we were all there for volleyball, but there was lots of different people. You realize when you are connected to a community of I talked to somebody earlier like situated. So he said, I don't like minded because it means that we all think the same. And I think it's important to be around people who think different. So I get it. Like minded, like situated. But it was a good thought, right? Of like why he mentioned it in a different way, his word choice. But I was reminded of that at this volleyball tournament because it was lots of different people from lots of different places that have lots of things that are important to them that are different than me.
And you had space to talk about it.
Totally. Exactly. There was, like, lots of downtime and pausing, I guess, but we were all kind of in the same general area, right? So, it's like connecting on yeah, just very differently. So, you create this environment for others, right? But there's also within your company pillars that you kinda have to stand on to say, like, "We will or we won't do this." So there's, like, the values that you guys stand for as the CultureCon company, and then that kind of radiates to the conference that you create. So, what are those things that are super important to you guys in the culture that you have? Maybe it's just between the 2 of you, maybe it's with others that you work with, maybe it's the vendors that you work with to put on these conferences and how you evaluate the vendors. Like, there has to be some sort of true north. And so, what are those things or the thing that you kind of stick to always to make sure that your vibes radiate?
Yeah, I think kind of what came to mind first for me was a couple years ago, we got certified as a B corporation, a benefit corporation. So it was a very rigorous process. You had to
I've
go
been
through.
through it with one of my clients. It is.
Yeah, yeah. They put a lot of time into those assessments, and they make you put a lot of time into those assessments. So I think luckily with the nature of our business, like we got through it pretty easily with a pretty high score. But there's standards that we need to hold ourselves accountable to make sure we can continue to keep that B Corp certification. So that's just kind of like the starting point for us. I think when it comes to our events and the topics that we curate, we always try to almost like co-create the events. So we'll pull our community and see like, hey, what topics are top of mind for you? What are you struggling with that you want us to bring in experts to help at our conference? And so for that reason, we try to keep a really open mind in the topics that we curate for our community and then have them kind of help build that with us and give us their insights. And those topics have changed a lot over the years. Like going back to our first conference, the most edgy topic we had, this was 2018, was a panel, and it was something like, is remote work going to stick around? And obviously that came through.
And then you said hi, and then you punched someone in the face.
Go back home and work.
Yep. Yep. And then, a couple years ago, we talked about psychedelics in the workplace and how ketamine microdosing might be helpful for your mental health. So very different, but I think that shows like the conversation continues to grow. We keep an open mind to have topics that are important to individuals, and we're not going to like push away a topic because someone says it's not important anymore. But if our community wants that topic, we're going to keep learning and growing and grow everyone's perspective around it.
Dude, I never you're right, co-creation is foundational to how we operate. So I'll take it one step further. We had our first industry specific conference last year entirely because our audience was asking us to co-create. It's called the EdGov Summit. So it's essentially where this came from is we had a lot of individuals that work in the public sector had been coming to our large industry agnostic events, and they would tell us, listen, the energy is amazing. This spirit of shared accountability is great, but the content of what we're listening to there's only a percentage of it that can realistically be applied back in our, let's say, government setting or higher education setting. So you two should think about creating a conference that is uniquely aligned with the challenges and opportunities that individuals who work in the public sector are faced with. And so that seed was planted in our minds. I think it's probably like November of 2023 is when we kind of hit this critical mass of people saying like, "Hey, you should do this and we can help co-create the types of topics that are going to make this really really valuable." And so yeah, just to underscore Zach's point is like we literally invented a conference because co-creation is so important to us.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to that personal accountability on both sides, right? That we talked about at the very beginning is like you can set something up, but then it has to also like come from the other side and you guys like meet each other where you're at and beautiful things happen. So, when was that conference?
The inaugural one was May of 2024, and then we'll have our second conference this April in Madison. Yep.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. So, it was a success if you're doing it again, I assume.
It was a success, yeah, and, let's just say it's really humbling to listen to the types of unique challenges that these public servants are engaging with every day relative to the private sector. And I don't want to make the even the private sector sound like it's this, homogeneous environment, right? But just the idea of being able to, let's say certain words or be able to express an idea without fear of what's coming back to you or just test something. And then if the test didn't work, scrap it. It's like even just things like that for some public working environments, it's a non-starter. And so it's like, how do we continue to build an engaging workforce in the public sector with the idea that these are the pillars that hold up society. So if we're not taking care of the people who are in these worlds, then external stakeholders and communities and societies as a whole are going to suffer. So it's humbling, I guess is what we can say.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. Okay, we could keep talking because I have so many more questions. So maybe we'll do a part two. I don't know. But what would you say individually, like for people listening, what would you say is the number one thing a leader, and that could be an informal leader, it doesn't mean they have to lead a team. They could be leading a project, they could be an individual contributor with leadership like desires inside of them to lead their peers, right? So when I use leaders in a very general sense, what's one thing people can do that are listening, walk away with and start doing to elevate the culture and the vibes of their organization, their team, or themselves?
Yeah, this is a great question because there's so many things that popped in my head. Just the first one that popped in my head, if I'm thinking about like someone at a leadership level, it's look at your mission, vision, values, and do those align one with you personally and others in your organization? Because a lot of times we have leadership that just kind of shoots that out, and the employers are like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't align with this. And you have this huge misalignment. And going back to co-creating, I worked on a project during the pandemic where we took this company's mission, vision, values, and we completely like redid them. And we did that with everyone at the company. So there was over 100 people that we talked to and interviewed and really co-created a mission, vision, values that's like built by everyone at the organization and then pitched that to leadership to get their buy-in. And it was a super powerful transformation because leadership gave people autonomy, trust. It built connection because then we had teams of people working together that usually don't talk to each other. So I think if you can go about it and kind of co-create this mission that aligns with everyone at the organization, it doesn't matter if you are a leader, if you're an intern or frontline employee, the janitor, like you can align with this and work just becomes so much more meaningful. You have purpose and fulfillment, and it's better for everyone in the organization.
I would just add, I'm trying not to sound too life coachy because I would be wildly unqualified, but from my
Is
experience,
that your imposter syndrome
I'm
speaking
imposter, yeah,
again?
imposter syndrome. Um, I think the answer is start with yourself in the sense of like if you're privileged enough to have the space and opportunity to take the time to know your intrinsic motivators and your unique strengths, and even the causes that are like important to you. Like that's really foundational to you being able to then try and show up as that best self. And from what I know about leadership, like you're not a very effective leader if you're not showing up as your best self. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Kristi, because you have way more expertise in this arena than I certainly do. But that would be, probably one of my biggest coaching suggestions for individuals that have the space to do it. But here's the kicker. It sounds super rewarding and easy to just go through this process of figuring all that stuff out. The reality is it's really hard. It's really hard because not only does it take time, but sometimes you learn things about yourself that are uncomfortable because you're like, "Oh my gosh, how is this aligned with my job or my career goals or even the relationships that I have around me?" And so I don't want to make it sound like it's all fluffy clouds and rainbows. Like it's hard work. But on the other side of it, I think that's where leadership development and growth happens.
Sure, sure. And I think sometimes people are, once they become self aware, even of the hard things, other things start to make more sense, right? Like, oh, that's why I struggle communicating with that person, or that's why I haven't been able to get my point across, or you know what I mean? Like things start to click, or maybe that's when they're like, gosh, I just need to stop doing it myself and go co create with somebody, right? But that is a mindset to think about, like, the negative things and turn it around and say, "Okay, so maybe this explains some things." And that not everybody's in that mindset. So, I agree. It is hard, but then utilize your resources to, like, help balance that, stay accountable to making the change if that's what's in it for you. So you guys are awesome and doing incredible things, and everyone should go to your conference, Madison, Wisconsin. Is it awesome? I don't know. I've never been there, but maybe.
We have to plug. Okay, here it goes. This is a Madison, Wisconsin plug. In the early days of the conference, Zach and I always felt like, all right, we have people coming here from all over the place, and they're probably wondering why are we coming to Madison, Wisconsin for this conference. So in the early days, we felt like we had to, let's say, justify why we were doing it in Madison. And the honest answer is because we're from here and we're lazy, so just deal with it. But a close second is year over year, Madison keeps popping up as one of the best cities to live in the entire country. So recently it was US World Report and News, CBS News, livability.com. So they study all these different dimensions of like the city around you. And Zach and I loved that because it was like so much of your broader community influences how you show up at work. For many years, that was kind of how we opened the conference up. So it was like equal parts justifying why we're doing it in Madison, but also translating it into the context of workplace culture. So there's our plug for Madison.
Just to piggyback on that, I think Nick and I have always thought, like, to justify it, we share, like, this laundry list of all the stats and data that rank us the top place to live. But just this morning or last night, one of our friends was going through, I think, the Atlanta airport, somewhere random. He was at a conference, and for some reason, Framed was the cover of a 1958 Life magazine article, and it was like Madison, Wisconsin, the greatest place in the country to live. So it's been a thing for way before CultureCon started.
They were onto something.
It's just like people underestimate it. It's like one of those hidden gems. Is that what it is?
Exactly. And we have the conference in August, not January on purpose because people actually will come. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. People might not like it as much if they come in the winter.
That's true.
Well, awesome, guys. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and all of the things. And we'll link CultureCon in the show notes so people can check it out. People can see what you're all about, who you guys are, and yeah, build a little bit more of the awesomeness in their own personal workspace.
We love you, Kristi. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
And that's a wrap on today's conversation. Huge thanks to Nick and Zach for sharing their insights on workplace culture, leadership, and really everything in between. That was such a fun time. It's been really great to dive into the world of vibes at work from their perspective. Remember, creating a positive and connected work environment starts individually with each one of us. And hey, if you're in the Madison, Wisconsin area, or if you're ready to check it out, don't forget to look into CultureCon. It sounds like Madison is a hidden gem with a lot to offer, and CultureCon is really, truly a remarkable experience. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to follow along for all the latest episodes. Catch you next time, and keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.